evaporating over, but remember that that water vapor is probably being moved by local weather, dominant wind patterns. So yes, that water's got to go somewhere, but no, not necessarily along the same cities in the river. Another thing that changes is that timing. Remember, the whole point of a dam is to do the opposite of the natural seasonality. The whole point of a dam is to make water available when it wouldn't be available in nature. So any seasonal cycle in your ecosystem is now going to have water at the wrong time. Of course, there's a problem with sediment flow. Sediment flow is blocked. All the sediment stays above the dam. None of it goes down past the dam. That's a key issue. We'll come back to that over and over and over again. It's a problem uphill because it fills up the reservoir, and it's a problem downhill because sediment flow is one of those natural variables. And when you remove the flow of sediment, you'll see later we get all sorts of problems. Finally, when you evaporate half the water, what happens to your salinity?
Same amount of salt, half the water.
Exactly, same amount of salt, half the water. Now, technically, it doesn't go 0.2, 0.4, 0.8, 1.6, 3.2, because there are other inputs of water. So salinity kind of drops between the tail end of this before it reaches the next reservoir. You're adding fresh water along the way. But suffice it to say, you can imagine how evaporation plus evaporation plus evaporation along the way would gradually raise salinity, right? Mexico sued the United States for turning their freshwater Colorado River into a saltwater river, and they won. And we were forced to put the world's only desal plant on a river. We don't make it like drinking water salinity. We just get it down to acceptable for their international lawsuit conditions. But it's the only salinity plant I'm aware of on a river. Yeah, it's a wacky thought. Otherwise, we were giving them basically ocean water in a river. So with all those things changing, you can imagine, ecologically, your river's flipped on its head. That water should not be there. It should be really, really, really shallow. But that water is really deep. That's at maximum flow at the exact 6-month opposite of what it should have been high water flow. That is high water during August. And I believe on this part of the Colorado, high water was supposed to be November. So that's not exactly 6 months. But anyway, wrong season, summer, not winter. Second of all, that water is really cold because it came out of the bottom of the reservoir. And third of all, you can see it's really clear. That should have been shallow, hot, muddy water. Instead, it's deep, cold, clear water. Tell you the story about these little fish that live there. There's these fish called mud suckers. They don't really suck mud, but they put their heads in the mud and they shake up all the mud, and then they feel around for little bugs that live in the sediment. These fish are evolved for the Colorado River. They're a Colorado River species. They're not found in many other rivers. They're brown, like the color of this desk, to be camouflaged by sand. And they're completely screwed now. Because they're evolved for hot water, but they're living in cold water. They're evolved to eat out of the sediment that should be at the bottom of that river, which is now rocky because it doesn't have any more sediment. So they're starving. They're freezing, and beaky dubs, they used to be hidden by their camouflage in the muddy water, So they have no method to avoid their prey. They had already evolved one, camo. Now they are anti-camo. Because you've got this clearly visible brown thing moving in the clear water. The poor fish don't even have eyeballs that let them see up. They used to never be able to see through the water. Why would they need to know if there's a bird coming? So they don't even realize that the birds see them, that there's a bird coming. They're just like, I'm camo. And the birds come in and pick them off and they're disappearing quickly. It's not just that fish. That should have been a bunch of sandbars with willows, a bunch of riparian habitat where birds would be nesting. But instead, there's no sediment to build the sandbars, and the water is too high, so you've got no riparian habitat. So you've got no birds. These are serious ecosystem transformations. We've changed every variable. So here comes the beginning of your list. You'll probably need this to become lengthier over time, but this is the beginning. First of all, you block sediment flow, which reduces habitat value. No more sandbars, no more willows, no more mud for the mudsuckers. But the loss of sediment is also a bummer for humans. We like to grow food along rivers, and sediment flow is a way to rejuvenate those floodplain soils. And while we're at it, that sediment is also a problem for the reservoir because the reservoir is shrinking. It's running out of capacity because it's being filled up with sand. But you can't drink sand and you can't make electricity on sand, so you're just getting a smaller and smaller reservoir every day. The really big dams, they receive tremendous volumes of sediment. They're filling up quickly. Hoover Dam will be solid sand in under 100 years.
Are there like people working to try sediment?
I mean, I'll get to this later, but basically the sediment problem is unsolvable. You can't clog a drain and clear a drain at the same time. Like, there's just no way to get both functions because they are precisely counter each other. Anytime you're holding water, you're slowing sediment. Anytime you're losing sediment, you're losing water. So you can't have both. You can split the difference, go in the middle. But either way, you're going to accumulate some sediment and you're going to lose some water. There's no way to do both. Number 2 on my list, the fish migration. Don't forget, please write this in your notes. Not all rivers have salmon. So yes, it's true that on rivers with salmon, their migrations are blocked. Yes, I am speaking of salmon on salmon rivers.
There are other fish that migrate.
But there are other fish that migrate. And BT dubs, there are fish which are affected that don't migrate too. Like the mudsucker does not migrate, is not a salmon. And it's still screwed, even though it doesn't migrate and it's not a salmon. Just saying. Number 3, that rhythm for the freshwater downstream is all upside down. So your wetland, the migratory birds come by and there's no water in my wetland. The estuaries are super salinated. So all those fish that come out of the ocean to breed in brackish water are now finding super saline water instead. These are serious changes. We're flipping their entire evolutionary reality. They are literally fish out of water, or at least fish in the wrong water.
They're coming from the ocean.
Or vice versa. And there's a few others. Here come some others. The loss of land and cultural resources. I want to write a book. I don't think anybody's written it yet. There are more than 5,000 Anasazi sites which you can only visit by scuba diving now. Because Lake Powell flooded over 5,000 Anasazi cultural sites. I think it would be rad to make a book about visiting Anasazi sites by scuba.
They're making museums underwater now. Like near Cancun, there's like.
Yeah, that dude with the statues that are.
But it's not just that. Like they're building a whole underwater museum of things like that, and you can go scuba diving in it.
I want to go. You want to go? Yeah. Down. Super down. Okay.
Did you show us that picture at the beginning of the year of that, the head on Easter Island that they put there?
Yes, which, by the way...
We figured out that it's fake, though.
It's fake.
Movie set. For years, I've been telling kids that it's a mystery. Kid raising his hand in college, like, what about the mystery of... you stupid, goofy. Exactly. Yeah, God forbid, you should never quote me. I make all of this up. Remember that. It's all bogus. So one of the big problems with blocking all the sediment, this is, I'm sorry, I think this will confuse many of you. When a river reaches the ocean, the river levels out. Because it levels out, the last of the sediment falls. So at the point where a river meets the ocean, so-called river mouths, you usually get what's called a river delta. The river is split and slowed by all those piles of sand. So the river comes out to the ocean and goes, it just kind of meanders and seeps into the sea. It's called a river delta. Delta because of the, is that Roman? Greek? Greek letter delta is a triangle, so the river makes a delta shape. It's called a delta, river delta, triangle.
Are there any animals that like belong to the habitat for the delta? Or no?
Absolutely. There are many species that nest in dry sand near water because that island gives you protection from terrestrial predators. So many birds nest there, and BT doves, alligators, and turtles are evolved to lay their eggs on those.
So is it like an important ecological site or not?
It is. River deltas are a type of coastal wetland. The funny thing is, when you keep all the sediment behind the dam, the river has nothing left to carry, so it'll eventually punch through an existing delta, and by creating a drain, that stuff goes out to the sea, so you turn your river delta wetland into a wet river mouth. It's just like a gutter going out to the ocean. So you lose coastal wetlands because of the sediment blockage. That's a difficult explanation. Be careful with that. More problems. I've already said this. I think I've already gone through all these. Hey, and by the way, there are good things about dams while we're having this conversation. The good part of the dam, flood control, irrigation, electricity, drinking water. Those are all nice things. I don't mean to say that this was all a bad idea. Yeah, navigation, that's right. They can make it simple to navigate some rivers. Oh, here's one I forgot to mention. The final problem on the list of downsides, international problems. You can imagine Mexico was pretty pissed when we turned their freshwater river into salt water, understandably. And in the Middle East, dams have been used as a weapon of war. if your neighboring country's not being friendly, just block off their water and kill them all. It works, unfortunately. I can't remember who it was. Egypt had a battle with one of its neighbors over water. I just